It's taken me a long time to even think about writing this down, honestly. A couple of years ago, I was pretty content, early 20s, just starting a desk job after college and living in a fairly anonymous apartment complex. My days were incredibly predictable: work, grocery shopping, maybe meeting a friend for coffee, and then back home to a quiet evening. It all felt normal. And for a while, that's exactly what I wanted, but something stuck with me and I keep replaying it in my head. I remember unpacking the groceries, putting the milk away, and lining up the cans. It was Tuesday, I think, because that was pasta night. I always checked the frames on the little shelf by the kitchen window when I came in. Just a habit. Symmetry, I guess. Everything had to be right, and usually it was. But the small silver frame with the picture of my grandmother, the one I'd specifically straightened before leaving for work, was tilted. Not by much, maybe 2 degrees, but enough. I frowned, walked over, and adjusted it. Probably just a tremor from the highway. Right? We got those sometimes. Old building, I didn't really think about it after that. I made pasta, watched some stupid show, and went to bed. The next morning, there was a package on my doorstep. Small brown paper, no return address. I almost didn't pick it up. I wasn't expecting anything. It was surprisingly heavy for its size. Inside was a single smooth river stone. Just a stone, gray and unremarkable. I put it on the kitchen counter, figuring it was a neighbor's kid playing a prank. Then I went to check the mail, and that's when I saw it, etched into the metal of Mrs. Davison's mailbox, right below her apartment number, was a symbol. A simple spiral, carved pretty deeply. It looked old. I glanced at the other boxes. Nothing. Just Mrs. Davison's. I thought maybe it was some kind of weird artistic thing she did herself. She was a retired art teacher, after all. But later that day, another package. This one contained a dried flower, pressed flat and brittle. And when I checked the mail again, there it was, the same spiral, now on Mr. Henderson's box across the hall, and I realized, with a cold feeling in my stomach, it wasn't Mrs. Davison who'd done it. It wasn't art. It was directed. The flower smelled like potpourri, that sickly sweet smell my grandmother used to have. I threw it out immediately. Then I started really looking at the mailboxes, not just glancing. I walked the whole hallway, slowly. The spiral was on Henderson's, like I said, and now on Old Man Hemlock's, 2 doors down. Hemlock barely leaves his apartment. I'd only seen him a handful of times in the 6 months I've lived here. And the spirals, they weren't exactly the same. Subtle differences, a tighter coil here, a slightly wider gap there. Like someone was practicing? I started taking the stairs. Always the stairs. I didn't want to be predictable with the elevator. It felt exposed, like a little glass box. And I checked my apartment again. Everything seemed normal, but I started going through things, not looking for anything specific, just checking. I found a small wooden bird tucked inside my pantry, behind the cereal boxes. I definitely didn't put it there. It was crudely carved, almost childlike, but unsettling. It felt watched. I thought maybe it was a kid from the building, sneaking into common areas. A lonely kid, maybe leaving little gifts. It was stupid. I know, but it was the only thing that made sense, a creepy, unsettling sense, but sense nonetheless. Then I realized something. The packages weren't arriving to my door. They were always just there, like someone had slipped them under or maybe through the mail slot without actually using a key. And I remembered seeing a maintenance guy, a new one I hadn't noticed before, fiddling with the mailboxes a couple of days ago. He'd been there for a long time, just staring at them. I hadn't thought anything of it. Now, I started avoiding the mail altogether, just ignoring it. It felt better, less like waiting for the other shoe to drop. Which is ridiculous, I know. It's just mail. But it wasn't, was it? I'd glance at the boxes when I went up and down the stairs, and the spirals were different, not always, but sometimes, a little deeper, a little wider. And more boxes had them now. Old Man Hemlock on the 3rd floor. Mrs. Davison, the one with the yappy chihuahua, even the superintendent's box. I was coming home late, around 11. The hallway was dark, the emergency lights casting long, weird shadows. I remember thinking how quiet it was, too quiet. Then I heard it, a scraping sound coming from the mailroom, like metal on metal. I froze. It sounded like someone was inside the mailboxes, actually inside them. That new maintenance guy, Frank, maybe. I told myself it was probably him doing some late-night repairs. But he wouldn't be scraping, and the sound stopped, then started again, closer this time, like he was moving between the boxes. I backed up, slowly. My hand found the doorknob to my apartment. I was about to turn it when I saw it. A shadow stretched long and thin, moving across the wall next to the mailboxes. It wasn't Frank, it was smaller. And the way it moved wasn't right. Too fluid, too quick. Then, a tiny glint of metal, something reflecting the emergency light, and a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice, a child's voice. I didn't think. I just turned the key and stumbled inside, slamming the door shut. I locked it, then wedged the chair under the knob. I spent the rest of the night with my back against the door, listening. The scraping stopped, but the quiet felt worse than any noise. I checked the peephole every few minutes, but the hallway was empty. This morning there was something new on my door, not a spiral. A single perfectly formed feather, black as night, and a scratch on the door frame, too high to be a normal scratch, like something climbed. I called the landlord first thing. I explained about the feather and the scratches. He sent Miguel, the new maintenance guy. Miguel barely looked at the door. He just shrugged and said old buildings settle, things shift. He did mention a previous tenant, a woman named Elsie, who'd lived here for decades, apparently. He said she was a bit eccentric and collected bird feathers. He even chuckled, like it was a funny story. The police weren't much better. A young officer, polite enough, took pictures of the scratches. He asked about the packages and the symbols. I told him everything, about the scraping sounds and the shadow. He filed a report. He said they'd patrol the building more frequently. It felt insufficient. Then I tried to do something proactive. I bought a small security camera, one of those wireless ones. I figured I'd set it up inside the mailbox, aimed at the slot. Maybe I'd catch something. It didn't even last a night. I went to check it this morning and it was gone. Not just the camera, but the little magnetic base too. It was clean as a whistle. Miguel was in the hallway, fiddling with the lock on apartment 3B's door. I asked him if he'd seen anyone near the mailboxes. He said he'd been doing plumbing work all night. He didn't meet my eyes. I started going through old building records, the ones the landlord keeps in his office. Elsie moved out 6 months ago, but there were records dating back further, way further. A tenant list from 1958, and then a handwritten note tucked into one of the files. It was a complaint from a Mr. Henderson complaining about peculiar markings appearing on the mailboxes. It was 1958, the same spirals. It's just vandalism, right? Some long-running prank passed down through tenants, a weird decades-long game, but the packages started after Elsie left, after Miguel started. I stopped using the mail slot completely. I had packages rerouted to work, even though it was a pain. It wasn't the packages themselves, not really. It was the feeling of something reaching through that little metal door, like a hand, even though it was just an object, a smooth stone last week, perfectly round and gray. Before that, a single dried rose thorns clipped off, and before that, the music box. That thing still gives me chills. It played the same 5 notes over and over, a little tinkling melody that sounded wrong. I started checking every hotel room, every rental, every campsite, under the bed, in the closet, behind the curtains, always looking for I don't even know what. A mark, something out of place. It's ridiculous, I know. But the thought of being in a space that hasn't been vetted, that someone else could have accessed it, is unbearable. I haven't spoken to Miguel since. I avoid the hallways when I see him working. He's still there, still with that quiet shuffle and the way he never quite looks at you. I convinced myself he was just lonely. A little odd, maybe, but harmless, that he was leaving the gifts, the etchings, as some sort of misguided attempt at connection, some weird, pathetic way to be noticed. It felt easier than the alternative. I tried to find anything about him. No social media, no record of previous addresses, nothing. It's like he materialized. The landlord said he's a good worker, reliable, but he also said that about the previous maintenance guy before he disappeared. It was just a quiet resignation, a went back home to his family type of thing. I never asked any follow-up questions. I still see the spirals sometimes, even when I close my eyes. They're not just on the mailboxes anymore. Or maybe they are, and I just see them everywhere now. I wonder how long he'd been doing it before Mr. Henderson complained in 1958. How long before Mr. Henderson? And how long will he keep doing it after me? It's strange what sticks with you even years later. I was delivering mail back then, early 20s, and had a pretty set route through some really quiet countryside. Most days were just uneventful, which honestly I preferred. It was a good job, predictable, and I got used to recognizing the little quirks of each house along the way. The chipped paint, the overgrown gardens, things like that. I've been meaning to get this off my chest for a while now. The next few days were normal, or as normal as that route got. Mrs. Henderson still left out cookies, old man Tiberius still complained about the price of stamps, and the Peterson place remained meticulously perfect. It was the mailboxes that started to feel off, though. Not the mailboxes themselves, but things on them. Little arrangements at first, it was just pebbles, carefully placed in a circle around the flag. Then it was twigs, forming a sort of star. I figured kids maybe, though the houses were pretty spread out, and it seemed deliberate. Old Man Hemlock's mailbox was the first one that really made me pause. He's a recluse and doesn't talk to anyone. I found 3 smooth gray stones balanced on top of each other like a tiny cairn. It wasn't haphazard, it was intentional. I remember thinking he must have finally gotten a hobby. Maybe he was into rock balancing or something. It was odd but harmless, right? Then it happened at the Caldwells. They have a big red mailbox, a real statement piece. I pulled up and there were feathers, just scattered around the base, mostly white ones. It looked like someone had been plucking a chicken right there. That made me a little uneasy. I glanced up at the house, windows dark even though it was the middle of the afternoon. I sped up my route after that, trying not to think about it. I told myself maybe they had chickens and the feathers just blew around. It was country living after all. Still, I kept looking at the mailboxes, and that's when I started noticing the symbols. Not always clear, sometimes just shapes made of things, and they were always new, every day, different arrangements. The symbols, they weren't random anymore. It took me 2 days to see it, but they were repeating. Not exactly, but variations on a theme, a spiral, mostly. Sometimes made of leaves, sometimes of those gray stones, and sometimes just scratched into the dirt around the mailbox post. It was the Peterson place that really drove it home. They had a perfectly manicured rose garden, everything symmetrical, and someone had arranged rose thorns in a spiral on their mailbox. It was precise. I started taking the back roads, trying to skip a few houses, hoping to avoid whoever was doing this. I figured it was a teenager, a bored kid with too much time on their hands. It was still unsettling, though. The feeling of being watched, I'd glance in my rearview mirror, but there was never anyone there, just the long, empty stretch of road. Then I realized they were anticipating me. I changed my route again, going the opposite direction, thinking I could throw them off. I skipped the Hemlock place. The Caldwells went straight to the end of the route and looped back. But when I came around to Old Man Tiberius's, there it was. A small spiral of dried grass, right on top of his mailbox. I hadn't even stopped there on my original route that day. That's when I started thinking it wasn't a kid. Old Man Tiberius is particular. He wouldn't tolerate someone messing with his property. He'd call the sheriff, which made me think maybe it was someone with him, someone he knew, someone he let onto his land, maybe a grandson visiting. He never mentioned family, but it had to be someone who knew my route, knew when I was coming. I started checking my mirrors constantly, not just for cars, but for anything. And I started noticing other things too. Curtains twitching in windows, a glimpse of someone watching from behind a tree. I'm probably just imagining it, I told myself. I'm just on edge. But the spirals kept appearing and they were always there, waiting for me. I started varying my stops, pulling past houses without delivering, just to see if anything would happen. It felt ridiculous, like I was playing a game with someone, but I couldn't shake it. Today, I skipped the Caldwells again. Beautiful lawn, the Caldwells always meticulously kept. As I drove past, I saw Mrs. Caldwell standing at her kitchen window, and she wasn't washing dishes or looking at the garden. She was just watching me, not waving, not even a curtain twitch, just staring. Then I remembered the last spiral. It wasn't on the mailbox post itself, it was on the flag. The little red flag you flip up when you have mail going out, and the Caldwells rarely get mail. They order everything online. I told myself it was coincidence, a weird coincidence, but I felt sick. I decided to go back. I told myself I needed to check for a package. Maybe they'd forgotten to flag it. Stupid. I know I shouldn't have. As I backed up, I saw him, Mr. Caldwell, standing by the edge of the woods that backed their property. He wasn't looking at me. Exactly. He was looking past me, towards the road. But he was holding something long and thin. It glinted in the sun. I jammed the car into drive and floored it. I didn't even bother finishing my route. Just drove straight back to the station, heart hammering. I honestly thought they were trying to scare me, to run me off the route. Some kind of property dispute, maybe. When I finally stopped shaking, I noticed something on my steering wheel. A single white feather. It hadn't been there before, and it smelled like lavender. Mrs. Caldwell grows lavender along her driveway. I didn't even realize I'd touched the wheel. It must have blown in through the window, but it felt placed, deliberate. I went to the postmaster, Mr. Henderson. I explained about the spirals, the feeling of being watched, Caldwell and the feather. He listened, nodding, mostly looking at his computer screen. He is a good guy, Henderson, but he has seen everything. Nothing really phases him. He said rural routes can be challenging. People are eccentric. He suggested I switch with old man Tiberius, saying Tiberius likes the quiet. Like I wanted to trade a potentially creepy situation for a guaranteed grumpy one. I tried to explain it wasn't just eccentricity, it was focused, like someone was paying attention to me. He said maybe I was just stressed and suggested a few days of sick leave. I tried to push it, asked if we could report it to the sheriff. Henderson just shook his head. He said they would say it's a misunderstanding and probably accuse us of harassing customers. He did agree to put a note in my file, something about customer relations concerns on the Caldwell route. It felt pathetic. I took the next day off. I couldn't face it. When I went back, I tried something new. I started taking pictures, every mailbox with a spiral, every time I saw Caldwell or his wife, even just their house. I figured if I had proof something, I even started logging the times. It felt ridiculous, like I was building a case for a ghost. Then I found the articles online, old newspaper clippings digitized about the Caldwell's son. He had been a behavioral psychologist, specializing in observational studies, specifically studies involving patterns of human behavior in isolated environments. He died a few years back, some kind of accident. But the articles mentioned his research, his methods, detailed notes, meticulous observation. And it hit me. They weren't trying to scare me off. They were studying me, like I was some kind of specimen. It wasn't about the route, it was about me on the route. And how long had it been going on? How long had I been part of their experiment? It has been 7 years, I think, since I finished that route. I never went back to being a carrier after that. Officially, it was stress leave, then retraining for indoor work. I sorted packages at the main depot, less exposure. That's what I told people anyway. I still drive the same way, though. I always scan the houses, even when I'm not on a route. I'm not looking for anything exactly. I just assess. I check if everything looks right. It's stupid, I know, but if a porch light is flickering, or a curtain isn't quite how it usually is, I feel this tightness in my chest. I avoid cul-de-sacs now, too. They have too many angles, too many places someone could be watching from. I saw Caldwell, old man Caldwell, once at the hardware store in the next town over. He didn't see me, he was buying fertilizer. I remember in a length of thick plastic sheeting. It seemed odd. I figured maybe he was finally getting around to covering his pool for the winter. He always seemed meticulous about that pool. I tried to convince myself it was just coincidence, that I was projecting, that my brain was still stuck in that loop, looking for patterns where there weren't any. But the thing is, I started noticing it with other people too. Anyone who just watches, cashiers who hold eye contact a beat too long, people lingering near my car at stoplights. I thought maybe it was related to the Caldwell's son, the psychologist. Maybe he had colleagues, people involved in the research. Maybe they were checking up on things, making sure I hadn't talked to anyone. It felt organized, like I'd stumbled onto something bigger than just a couple of weird old people. The other day, I was at the grocery store and a woman was staring at me, just studying my face. I realized I hadn't made eye contact with anyone in almost 1 hour. I just kept my head down, focusing on the cereal boxes, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being cataloged. I still don't know what she wanted to know. It's taken me a long time to even think about writing this down. Honestly, a couple of years ago, my life was remarkably normal. I was in my late 20s working a pretty standard office job and had just moved into a quiet little neighborhood with mostly retirees. Everything was very predictable, very pleasant. I fell into a comfortable routine of morning coffee, work, evening walks, and polite waves to the people I passed. It's just been stuck in my head lately, replaying itself, and I figured maybe getting it out there would help. The walks were the best part of the day, honestly. Just a chance to decompress after being stuck inside all day staring at a screen. I usually took the long way around, past Mrs. Henderson's place. She always kept her garden immaculate, little ceramic gnomes scattered amongst the roses. It was a bit much, even for the neighborhood, but harmless. That's what I thought, anyway. It was a Tuesday, I think. Definitely cooler than usual for September. I was coming around the corner onto her street when I saw her. She was stacking rocks. Not a cairn, nothing artistic, just lifting these river stones one at a time and placing them directly on top of each other, and they wouldn't stay. They were roundish and smooth, and every time she put one on, it would wobble and fall. She didn't seem frustrated. She didn't even react when they tumbled, just picked up the next one and tried again. Over and over. I slowed down, thinking maybe she'd dropped something and was trying to create a little base for it. But there wasn't anything to base, just the stones, and her endlessly stacking and restacking. It was exhausting to watch, and she was looking right at me while she did it. Not a friendly wave or a nod, just looking. My skin prickled. It was probably just a weird hobby, some kind of physical therapy maybe. She must have had a stroke or something, and this was her way of regaining coordination. Still, I quickened my pace. I just felt better to keep moving. I made it to my driveway, fumbled with the keys, and practically dove inside. Shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it for a minute, catching my breath. It was just an old lady stacking rocks, right? I started taking the long way home after that. It added 15 minutes to the drive, looping around through Old Mill Road. It felt ridiculous, driving so far out of my way to avoid what? An old woman in her rocks? But I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. It wasn't like a creepy stare, exactly. It was more accounted for, like I was part of her schedule. Then I noticed the flags. Small, brightly colored flags were stuck into her lawn, forming a line. At first I thought it was for a garden, maybe she was marking where she'd planted bulbs, but there were no bulbs. Just the flags, perfectly spaced, pointing directly at my house. Not near my house at it. I mentioned it to Sarah, my wife. She laughed. Maybe she's a veteran and she's just patriotic? I wanted to believe that. It made sense. A little eccentric, sure, but harmless. But the flags weren't American flags. They were these weird primary colored things like the kind you get in party packs, and she kept adjusting them. I'd drive by and they'd be slightly different, always maintaining that line of sight. Yesterday, I came home early. Sarah was still at a conference. I pulled into the driveway and saw her, not stacking rocks, not adjusting flags. She was standing at her kitchen window just watching, but she wasn't looking at the house. She was looking at my car, and she knew exactly when I was coming. I'd taken a different route than usual, trying to be unpredictable. It didn't matter. She was waiting. I went inside, locked the doors, and drew the curtains. I told myself it was just a coincidence. She probably just happened to be looking out the window, but I checked the security camera footage. She started watching the street before I even turned onto my block. I didn't sleep well. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves against the window, I kept replaying the camera footage, her just waiting. It wasn't normal. Sarah got home late, around 11. She was exhausted and barely registered when I told her I'd booked a hotel for the night. "What? Why?" she mumbled, half asleep. I just said I needed a clear head, that I felt off. We packed a bag for her quickly, just essentials. I didn't bother explaining the specifics. I knew if I tried to describe the feeling, the cold knot in my stomach, she'd tell me I was letting it get to me. As I was backing the car out, I saw movement at her window. Just a flicker. I floored it. We didn't take the usual route to town. I went the long way, back roads, trying to throw her off. But when we got to the highway, there she was, not right behind us, but a few cars back. Same beat-up Buick. I checked my rearview mirror obsessively. She stayed there, maintaining the distance. I started to think, maybe she's not trying to scare us. Maybe she's just lonely. Maybe she wants to talk. It was a stupid thought, I know, but it was the only thing that felt remotely plausible. I pulled over at a gas station, hoping she'd pass, that it was just a coincidence. She didn't. She slowed down, matching our pace as we filled the tank. I could see her in the reflection of the pump staring, not at me, not at Sarah, but at the car itself. And then, as we pulled back onto the highway, she accelerated, pulling alongside us. She rolled down her window, not to wave, not to speak, just to look. And in her hand, I saw it. One of those brightly colored flags, clutched tight. I didn't go to work the next day. I called in sick and said I had a migraine. Sarah was concerned. She kept asking if I wanted to go to the doctor. I just wanted to stay inside. I kept the curtains closed, checking the windows every few minutes. I felt ridiculous and paranoid, but I couldn't shake the image of her, that flag. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was collecting them, a weird hobby, a travel thing. I even looked up flag collecting, trying to find forums, anything. It was a surprisingly normal hobby, but those weren't travel flags. They weren't from anywhere I recognized, and she wasn't displaying them like a collector. It was deliberate, like a message. I decided I needed to see if she was home, just to confirm she wasn't waiting for us. I drove past her house slowly. She wasn't outside. Good. But then I noticed something new. She'd rearranged her garden, not with flowers or shrubs, but with stones. She'd laid out a pattern of smooth gray stones in her front yard, and it looked familiar. It took me a second, but it was a rough approximation of our driveway, our actual driveway. I floored it. I drove straight home, my heart hammering. Sarah was in the kitchen, making coffee. "What's wrong?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just grabbed my phone and started searching. Not for flags, not for stone patterns, for her name. And that's when I found the article, a local news story from almost 1 year ago. A missing person, a young woman vanished after jogging in the park near our neighborhood. The last person to see her was an elderly woman, a witness. The woman's name was the same as our neighbor. I scrolled through the comments. Someone mentioned the woman had been questioned, but never considered a suspect. They said she'd been fixated on the missing woman's routine. She always knew when she ran and where she ran. It wasn't about loneliness. It wasn't a hobby. It was something else, something cold. And I realized, with a sickening lurch, she hadn't been watching the car. She'd been watching us. It was the birdhouses, I think, that finally broke Sarah. Not the stones, not the flags, not even when she started leaving little piles of things on our porch. Just little collections, smooth river rocks, pine cones arranged in spirals. Once a handful of feathers, the birdhouses were different. She built 3 of them, identical, and hung them facing our kitchen window. Each one had a tiny, perfectly carved figure inside, a woman running. We called the police again, of course. They came and talked to her. She was cooperative. She said she was just passing the time. That she liked to build things. They said there wasn't much they could do. No laws against birdhouses, no laws against being weird. They suggested we get a restraining order, but honestly, it felt like it would just escalate things. It would be acknowledging her. We started taking different routes home, different grocery stores. We stopped jogging. Sarah quit her book club, saying she didn't feel like going out in the evenings anymore. I started working from home full-time, pretending it was a career move. It wasn't. It was just safer. I convinced myself she was grieving, that the missing woman reminded her of someone. A daughter, maybe? That this was some twisted, lonely way of coping. It felt cleaner than the alternative. We moved 6 months later. A small town, further inland. No parks, no jogging trails. I still check my rearview mirror every single time. But it's not cars I look for anymore. It's older women, sitting very still. And sometimes when I'm building something with my hands, anything really, I find myself carving, just little figures. I don't know why, I just do. And the worst part is, I can't ever remember learning how.